The whiskey glass shattered against the saloon wall, spraying amber liquid across the weathered planks as Helena Whitmore felt every pair of eyes in Globe. Arizona turned toward her with contempt and disgust. The year was 1883, and she had become the most despised woman in town through no fault of her own, branded with a scarlet letter she had never earned simply because Thomas Hartley, the banker's son, had told a lie to save his own reputation after she had rejected his advances. Now, standing in the middle of the dusty street with her few belongings clutched in her trembling hands, she had nowhere left to go as the midday sun beat down mercilessly upon her auburn hair. The church had turned her away first, Reverend Mills stating with cold finality that no house of God could shelter a woman of such questionable morals. Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house had literally slammed the door in her face, the sound echoing through the street like a gunshot. Even the hotel, which typically accepted anyone with coin, refused her entry when the clerk recognized her name. Helena stood there in the street, her blue calico dress dusty from the road, her face flushed with humiliation and exhaustion as townspeople whispered behind gloved hands and men spat tobacco juice at her feet. She had arrived in Globe only 6 months prior, a schoolteacher from Boston seeking adventure and a fresh start after her parents had passed from influenza. The town had welcomed her initially, grateful for an educated woman willing to teach their children. But Thomas Hartley, the spoiled son of the wealthiest man in town, had taken an interest that went beyond appropriate. When she had firmly rejected his inappropriate proposal in the schoolhouse one evening, explaining that she had no romantic feelings for him whatsoever, his face had turned crimson with rage and wounded pride. Within 2 days, rumors spread through Globe like wildfire. Thomas claimed that Helena had tried to seduce him, that she had made advances toward him and become hostile when he virtuously rejected her. His father's money and influence ensured that every person of standing believed the lie without question. The school board dismissed her immediately, unwilling to even hear her side of the story. Her few friends, women she had shared tea with and laughed alongside, turned their backs one by one, afraid that association with her would tarnish their own reputations. Now, 3 weeks after losing her position, her savings exhausted on the boarding house room she had been evicted from that very morning, Helena had nowhere to turn. The stage wouldn't come through for another 5 days, and she barely had enough money for passage anyway. She needed shelter, food, and some way to survive until she could escape this nightmare. She walked toward the edge of town, her small trunk growing heavier with each step, her carpet bag cutting into her shoulder. The mining operations that had given Globe its livelihood dotted the landscape, and rougher establishments lined the outskirts where decent women never ventured. Helena knew she was taking a risk, but desperation had eroded her options to nothing. The sun was beginning to lower toward the western horizon when she finally collapsed beneath a cottonwood tree near a creek, her strength completely depleted. She allowed herself the luxury of tears for the first time since this ordeal began, her shoulders shaking with sobs that she muffled against her sleeve. She had never felt so alone, so utterly abandoned by humanity. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up sharply, wiping hastily at her tear-stained face. A man on a chestnut gelding approached slowly, clearly noticing her distress but maintaining a respectful distance. He was tall in the saddle, wearing a dusty brown hat and simple working clothes, his face tanned from long hours in the sun. Something about his eyes, a warm hazel color, seemed different from the cruel stares she had endured all day. "Madam," he said, his voice low and careful, "you look like you could use some help." Helena straightened her spine, trying to reclaim some dignity despite her obvious circumstances. "I doubt you would want to help me if you knew who I was." The man dismounted with easy grace, keeping his distance but removing his hat respectfully. "I am Ethan Zimmerman. I have a small ranch about 3 miles from here, and I figure I can decide for myself who deserves help and who does not." "You are one of the few in this town with that perspective," Helena said bitterly. "I am Helena Whitmore, and I am certain you have heard the stories." Ethan was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands thoughtfully. "I have heard things. I have also been around long enough to know that the truth and what gets spoken in town are not always the same thing." Helena felt a flicker of something she had not experienced in weeks: hope. But she immediately quashed it, unwilling to be disappointed again. "Why would you believe me over Thomas Hartley? His family practically owns this town." "Because I saw you teaching the children at the school before all this started," Ethan said simply. "I saw how gentle you were with the little ones, how patient with the older boys who would rather be anywhere else. I saw kindness in you. And I saw Thomas Hartley corner you behind the general store one afternoon, saw the way you pushed him away and the anger on his face when you did. I did not think much of it at the time, figured it was not my business, but when these rumors started spreading, I remembered that day." Helena stared at him in astonishment. "You saw that. Why did you not say anything to the school board, to anyone?" Ethan looked uncomfortable. "I should have. I regret that I did not. Truth is, I am not well regarded myself in certain circles. The Hartleys have never forgiven me for refusing to sell them my water rights, and my word against theirs would not have helped you much. But I can help you now if you will let me." "How?" Helena asked, exhaustion making her voice crack. "The entire town has turned against me. I have no job, no place to stay, barely enough money to leave." Ethan met her eyes directly. "You are welcome in my home. I have a ranch house with a spare room. My sister stayed there before she married and moved to Tucson last year. It is clean and proper, and I give you my word that I would never behave in any way that was inappropriate. You could stay until you figure out your next step, or longer if you wanted to. I could use someone to help with the cooking and garden, maybe mend some things. I would pay you fair wages." Helena wanted to accept immediately, but years of propriety made her hesitate. People would talk. "They already think poorly of me, but this would ruin whatever small shred of reputation I might someday reclaim." "People are already talking," Ethan pointed out gently. "And in my experience, people determined to think poorly of you will find reasons regardless of what you do. The question is whether you can survive the next week on your own out here, because I do not think those are good odds." He was right, and they both knew it. Helena took a deep breath and made her decision. "I accept your offer, Mr. Zimmerman, and I promise I will work hard to earn my keep." "Just Ethan," he said, a small smile crossing his weathered face. "And I am not worried about that. Let me help you with your things." He loaded her trunk onto his horse with ease, then offered her his hand to help her stand. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip steady and respectful. They walked together toward his ranch, Ethan leading his horse while Helena carried her carpet bag. The evening air was cooling, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to the emerging stars. The Zimmerman ranch was modest but well-maintained. A solid timber house with a covered porch and a barn that looked newly repaired. Chickens scratched in a yard enclosed by neat fencing, and a large garden showed signs of recent attention, though it clearly needed more care than one person could easily provide. The mountains rose purple and magnificent in the distance, and Helena felt something in her chest loosen slightly at the sight of this peaceful place. Ethan showed her to the spare room, which was exactly as he had described. Clean, simple with a proper bed covered in a quilt that showed expert stitching. There was a dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a window that looked out over the garden toward the mountains. "I will let you settle in," Ethan said from the doorway. "I need to tend to the horses and check on a few things in the barn. There is a pump out back for fresh water, and the privy is behind the house. I will start something for supper when I come back in." "Please," Helena said quickly, "let me cook. You have done so much already, and I would like to feel useful." Ethan nodded. "All right. Kitchen supplies are pretty basic, but you are welcome to anything you find. I will be in before dark." After he left, Helena took a moment to simply sit on the bed, feeling the first true safety she had experienced in weeks. The room smelled faintly of lavender, and everything was surprisingly neat for a bachelor household. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 other dresses on pegs and arranging her hairbrush and few toiletries on the dresser. Then she found her way to the kitchen. The kitchen was indeed basic but clean, with a good iron stove and well-organized shelves. She found flour, beans, some salt pork, eggs from the chickens, and various staples. There were potatoes in a bin and some dried herbs hanging by the window. Helena set to work with a will, grateful to have something productive to occupy her hands and mind. She made biscuits, fried salt pork, cooked beans with onions and molasses, and scrambled eggs with herbs. It was simple fare, but she put care into it, wanting to show her gratitude through her cooking. By the time Ethan returned, washed up at the pump outside, and entered through the back door, the kitchen was warm and filled with good smells. "That smells better than anything I have managed in months," Ethan said, genuine appreciation in his voice. "My sister always said I could burn water if I set my mind to it." Helena found herself smiling, a real smile that felt strange after so many days of misery. "It is nothing fancy, but it should be filling." They sat down at the simple wooden table, and Ethan said a brief grace before they ate. The meal passed in comfortable silence at first, both of them hungry and tired. But as the edge came off their appetites, they began to talk. "How long have you had this ranch?" Helena asked. "My father started it about 20 years ago," Ethan explained. "He passed 5 years back, left it to me and my sister. Martha took her portion in cash when she married, and I have been running it solo since then. It is not a big operation, just some cattle, chickens, a good garden when I have time to tend it properly. But it is mine, and I like the work." "No wife?" Helena asked, then immediately felt her face heat with embarrassment. "I apologize, that was too personal." Ethan did not seem offended. "No wife. Came close once, but she decided she wanted city life more than ranch life. Moved to San Francisco about 3 years ago. I wished her well." "That must have been difficult," Helena said softly. "It was for a while, but I think we wanted different things ultimately, so it worked out for the best." He looked at her directly. "What about you? You came all the way from Boston. That is a big journey to make alone." Helena told him about her parents, about their deaths, and her decision to seek a new beginning in the West. She told him about her love of teaching, the joy she had found in helping children discover learning. And finally, her voice shaking slightly despite her efforts to remain composed, she told him the truth about Thomas Hartley. "He asked me to dinner one evening after school," she said. "I declined politely, explaining that I did not think it would be appropriate. He persisted for weeks, becoming more insistent each time. Finally, he cornered me in the schoolhouse and proposed marriage outright. When I said no, that I did not have feelings for him and did not wish to marry him, he became angry. He said things, ugly things about how I should be grateful that someone of his standing would even consider me. I asked him to leave. 2 days later, the rumors started. Ethan's jaw was tight with anger, but his voice remained calm. "That is what I figured happened. Thomas has always been a spoiled brat who could not handle anyone telling him no. His father's money has protected him from consequences his whole life. But not my reputation," Helena said quietly, "that he managed to destroy quite efficiently." "Reputations can be rebuilt," Ethan said firmly. "It takes time, but truth has a way of coming out eventually." Helena wanted to believe him, but her experience of the past weeks had taught her that people often preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. Still, sitting in this warm kitchen with this kind man who had offered help without expecting anything in return, she felt a small seed of hope take root in her heart. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Helena woke early and prepared breakfast while Ethan handled the morning chores. After he left to work with the cattle or repair fences or tend to the dozens of tasks that kept a ranch running, she would clean the house, work in the garden, feed the chickens and collect eggs, and prepare meals. In the evenings, they would eat together and talk, sharing stories about their lives, their dreams, their perspectives on the world. Ethan was unlike any man Helena had known before. He was thoughtful and well-read despite his limited formal education, with books on his shelves ranging from Shakespeare to agricultural manuals. He listened when she spoke, truly listened, asking questions and considering her opinions with genuine interest. He never made her feel lesser for being a woman, never dismissed her thoughts or talked over her. And he kept his word absolutely about propriety, always respectful, always careful to maintain appropriate distance. But Helena found herself noticing things about him. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle competence of his hands as he worked, the deep timbre of his voice when he read aloud from books in the evening, a habit they had fallen into sharing. The way he was patient with the animals, kind even to the ornery rooster that tried to attack anyone who came near the henhouse. 3 weeks into her stay, Helena accompanied Ethan into town to purchase supplies. She was nervous about facing the townspeople again, but Ethan's steady presence beside her gave her courage. They drove the wagon down the main street, and Helena felt the familiar weight of hostile stares. At the general store, the clerk was clearly uncomfortable serving them, but he did his job if coldly. As they were loading their purchases into the wagon, Thomas Hartley himself appeared, his face flushing red when he saw Helena. "I see the fallen woman has found someone willing to take her in," Thomas said loudly, ensuring that passers-by could hear. "Tell me, Zimmerman, do you know what kind of person you are harboring?" Ethan straightened slowly, his expression hardening. "I know exactly what kind of person she is. An honest woman who has been treated shamefully by a coward who cannot handle rejection." Thomas stepped closer, his hands clenching into fists. "You dare call me a coward? I call you what you are," Ethan said evenly. "A liar who destroyed an innocent woman's reputation because she would not have you. I saw you corner her behind the general store, saw her push you away. I know the truth, and I would be happy to share it with anyone who wants to listen." A small crowd had gathered, and Thomas looked around nervously, clearly not expecting anyone to challenge his version of events. "You are just defending her because she is warming your bed," he spat out venomously. Ethan moved so quickly that Helena barely saw it, grabbing Thomas by the front of his expensive jacket and slamming him back against the wagon. "You will apologize to the lady, or I will forget that we are standing in the middle of town," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Ethan," Helena said softly, placing a hand on his arm. "He is not worth it." But Thomas, perhaps sensing he had gone too far or perhaps seeing something in Ethan's eyes that frightened him, stammered out, "I apologize." Ethan released him with a small shove. Stay away from us, and keep Miss Whitmore's name out of your mouth." They finished loading the wagon in tense silence and drove out of town. Once they were clear of the buildings, Helena released a shaky breath. "Thank you for defending me, but you should not have risked yourself that way. The Hartleys have power in this town." "They have money," Ethan corrected. "That is not the same as power, not really, and I would not let him talk about you that way regardless of consequences." Helena felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling that was becoming increasingly familiar around Ethan. She was falling in love with him, she realized with a start. Somewhere between the shared meals and evening conversations, between his steady kindness and unwavering support, her feelings had shifted from gratitude to something much deeper. The realization terrified her. She had come to depend on the safety of his home, the comfort of his presence. What if he did not return her feelings? What if he saw her only as someone who needed help, a charity case? She could not bear the thought of losing this place she had come to think of as home, or worse, making things awkward between them. But over the following weeks, she began to notice changes in how Ethan looked at her. His gaze would linger when he thought she was not watching. He found excuses to be near her, helping her carry water from the pump or reaching overhead items in the kitchen. Their hands would brush during simple interactions, and neither would pull away quite as quickly as propriety suggested they should. One evening in late autumn, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Ethan finally spoke what had been building between them. "Helena," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something, and I understand if it makes things difficult. But I cannot keep silent anymore." Her heart began to race. "What is it?" "I have grown to care for you," he said, turning to face her fully. "More than I should have, perhaps. More than I intended to when I first offered you shelter. You have become essential to my days, to my life. I look forward to our conversations, to sharing meals with you, to simply being near you. And I hope, that maybe you feel something similar." Helena felt tears prick her eyes, but these were tears of joy. "I do," she whispered. "I have been so afraid to say anything, afraid of losing you." Ethan reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing gently across her knuckles. "You could never lose me. From the moment I saw you crying under that cottonwood tree, something in my heart recognized something in yours. I wanted to protect you, yes, but also to know you, to be near you." "People will talk," Helena said, but there was no real protest in her voice. "People are already talking," Ethan replied, echoing his words from their first meeting. "Let them talk. I love you, Helena Whitmore, and I do not care who knows it." "I love you too," she said, the words feeling like freedom on her tongue. Ethan cupped her face gently in his work-roughened hands and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Helena felt her whole world shift and settle into place, as if everything that had happened, all the pain and humiliation, had been leading her to this moment, to this man, to this love. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Ethan smiled. "I would like to court you properly if you will have me, and eventually, if you are willing, I would like to marry you." "Yes," Helena said, laughing through happy tears. "Yes to all of it." The next months were both challenging and beautiful. The town's opinion did not change overnight, but Ethan and Helena faced the gossip together, their love growing stronger in the face of adversity. Ethan made a point of publicly courting Helena, driving her to church every Sunday and sitting beside her despite the disapproving stares, taking her to the occasional dance or social event, and holding his head high when others whispered. Slowly, very slowly, some people began to soften. It started with Mrs. Patterson, an elderly widow who had always liked Helena before the scandal. She invited them to tea one afternoon, and though the visit was brief, it was cordial. Then Doc Harrison, who had never been one to follow town politics, made a point of greeting them warmly at the mercantile. Small gestures, but they meant the world. The real turning point came in spring, nearly a year after Helena had first arrived at Ethan's ranch. Thomas Hartley was caught in a compromising situation with a married woman, her husband finding them together in circumstances that could not be explained away. The scandal rocked the town, and suddenly Thomas's character was in question in ways it had never been before. Several people, remembering how quickly Thomas had accused Helena, began to wonder if perhaps they had been too hasty in their judgment. When confronted by his father about the married woman, Thomas apparently confessed to other lies he had told, including, eventually, the truth about Helena. His father, furious and humiliated, forced Thomas to make a public apology at church. Helena sat beside Ethan in their usual pew when Thomas stood before the congregation, his face red with shame and anger, and admitted that he had lied about Helena Whitmore, that she had never made advances toward him, that he had been rejected and had lied in retaliation. The apology was clearly forced and lacking in genuine remorse, but it was public and it was witnessed, and that was what mattered. Afterward, people who had shunned Helena for months approached her with awkward apologies. Some seemed genuine in their regret. Others were clearly just following the social tide, but Helena accepted their words with grace. She had learned that holding on to bitterness would only poison her own happiness, and she had too much to be grateful for to waste energy on resentment. The school board approached her about resuming her position as teacher, but Helena politely declined. Her life had moved in a different direction, and she had no desire to return to a place that had dismissed her so easily. She had found contentment in her life at the ranch, in her partnership with Ethan, in the quiet satisfaction of building something together. Ethan proposed formally on a warm evening in May. Getting down on one knee in the garden, Helena had nurtured into abundant life, and offering her a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. She said yes with tears streaming down her face, and they married a month later in a small ceremony at the ranch, with Doc Harrison and his wife standing as witnesses, and Mrs. Patterson preparing a lovely meal for the celebration afterward. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, both of them nervous but deeply in love. Ethan was gentle and patient, and Helena felt cherished in ways she had never imagined possible. They lay together afterward, Helena's head on Ethan's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I could be this happy," she whispered into the darkness. "Neither did I," Ethan replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Helena Zimmerman." She smiled at the sound of her new name. "Even though I brought scandal and gossip into your peaceful life. Especially because of that," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "My life was not peaceful before you, it was just quiet. There is a difference. You brought light and love and purpose. You brought everything that matters." The years that followed were filled with hard work and deep joy. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, Helena's organizational skills and Ethan's ranching knowledge creating a successful operation. They expanded the garden, added more chickens, increased their cattle herd gradually, and became known for having some of the best produce in the area. 2 years into their marriage, Helena gave birth to a son they named Samuel. The labor was long and difficult, but Doc Harrison saw them through safely, and when Ethan first held his boy, Helena saw tears in her husband's eyes. Samuel had Ethan's hazel eyes and Helena's auburn hair, and he was absolutely perfect. Being parents brought new challenges and new joys. Ethan was a devoted father, patient and loving, teaching Samuel about the ranch as he grew, showing him how to care for the animals and respect the land. Helena watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him all over again, seeing new depths to the man she had married. When Samuel was 3, Helena became pregnant again, this time with twins. The pregnancy was harder, her body struggling with carrying 2 babies, but she was determined and strong. Ethan hovered over her constantly, worried and protective, taking on extra work to ensure she could rest. The twins, a boy and a girl they named Daniel and Rose, arrived a month early but healthy. The ranch house was suddenly filled with the chaos of 3 young children, and while exhausting, it was also wonderful. Ethan proved to be endlessly patient with the midnight feedings and crying babies, walking the floor with one twin while Helena nursed the other, both of them bleary-eyed but happy. As the children grew, the ranch became a place of laughter and love. Samuel was serious and thoughtful like his father, taking his role as big brother earnestly. Daniel was adventurous and fearless, always exploring and getting into mischief. Rose was sweet but determined, showing early signs of her mother's intelligence and her father's stubbornness. The town's attitude toward the Zimmerman family had completely changed over the years. Helena was now respected as Ethan's wife and the mother of his children, her past scandal largely forgotten or reframed as an injustice that had been corrected. People greeted her warmly at church, sought her advice on gardening and child-rearing, included her in social events. Thomas Hartley had left Globe in disgrace after his own scandal, moving somewhere back east according to rumor. His father had aged considerably, his pride broken by his son's behavior. He had approached Ethan and Helena one day in town, his hat in his hands, and offered a sincere apology for the pain his family had caused. They had accepted it, knowing that forgiveness was important even if forgetting was harder. When Samuel was 10 and the twins were 7, Helena found herself pregnant once more, a surprise but a welcome one. This pregnancy was easier than the twins had been, and she delivered a healthy baby boy they named Jacob. Ethan joked that they were going to need to expand the house again, but his eyes were full of love as he said it. The ranch had grown significantly over the years. They now employed 2 ranch hands who lived in a bunkhouse Ethan had built, and during harvest or busy seasons, they hired additional help. The cattle operation was substantial, and they had added horses to their livestock, breeding and training them for sale. Helena's garden had expanded into a small farm operation, with excess produce sold in town and to the mining operations. But despite their prosperity and the demands of running a successful ranch and raising 4 children, Ethan and Helena always made time for each other. They still sat on the porch in the evenings when weather permitted, watching the sunset and talking about their days. They still read together by lamplight after the children were in bed. They still held hands while walking around their property, still stole kisses in the barn, still looked at each other with love and desire even after years of marriage. On their 15th anniversary, Ethan surprised Helena with a trip to Tucson to visit his sister Martha and her family. They left the children with Doc Harrison and his wife, who had become like family over the years, and took the stage south. It was Helena's first trip away from the ranch since their honeymoon, and she felt strangely nervous and excited. Tucson was bigger and more cosmopolitan than Globe, and Martha's home was lovely, her husband a successful lawyer. But what struck Helena most was how happy Martha was to see them, how proud she was of the life her brother had built. "I always worried about Ethan alone on that ranch," Martha confessed to Helena one afternoon while the men were out. "He seemed content enough, but I could see the loneliness in him. Then he wrote to me about you, about how he had offered you shelter and how you had transformed his life. I knew from the way he described you that he was in love, even if he had not admitted it to himself yet. "He saved me," Helena said simply. "When everyone else in Globe had turned their backs, when I had nowhere to go and no hope left, he offered me kindness and safety. He gave me back my life." "You saved each other," Martha corrected gently. "And you built something beautiful together. Anyone can see how much you love each other, how strong your partnership is. That is rare and precious." The trip to Tucson was restorative, a chance for Ethan and Helena to remember themselves as individuals and as a couple outside of their roles as parents and ranchers. They walked through the town square hand in hand, ate meals at restaurants, attended a concert, and made love in their hotel room with a freedom and abandon that was impossible with 4 children in the house. When they returned to Globe, refreshed and reconnected, the children swarmed them with hugs and stories about everything that had happened while they were gone. Helena held each of her babies close, breathing in their familiar scents, while Ethan thanked the Harrisons profusely for their care. That night, after the children were finally settled in bed and the house was quiet, Ethan pulled Helena into his arms in their bedroom. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For saying yes when I offered you shelter all those years ago. For trusting me when you had every reason not to trust anyone. For building this life with me. For giving me these beautiful children. For loving me even when I am stubborn or difficult." Helena reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else would. For believing in me when the whole town had condemned me. For offering me not just shelter but a home, not just safety but love. You are the best man I have ever known, Ethan Zimmerman, and I would choose you again and again in every lifetime." They kissed, deep and passionate, and made love with the tenderness and familiarity of long partnership, but also with the excitement that had never faded between them. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, they talked about their dreams for the future, for their children's futures, for the legacy they were building together. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as all years do. They lost the old rooster that had terrorized everyone for over a decade, and the children held a solemn funeral that made both parents hide smiles. They celebrated as Samuel showed an aptitude for ranching that promised he might take over the operation someday. They worried through childhood illnesses and injuries, the way all parents do, grateful each time for Doc Harrison's skill and their children's resilience. When Helena was 42 and Ethan was 45, they became grandparents. Samuel, now 22, and married to a sweet young woman named Alice from a neighboring ranch, welcomed a daughter. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Helena felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible, a new depth of love opening up inside her. Ethan was just as smitten with his granddaughter, a tiny thing with dark hair and blue eyes who they named Catherine. He built her a cradle with his own hands, carving intricate designs into the wood, and sang her songs in his deep voice that made the baby stop fussing and stare up at him with wide eyes. "We are getting old," Helena teased one evening, watching Ethan rock Catherine on the porch. "Speak for yourself," Ethan retorted with a grin. "I am just getting started." But time did continue its march, bringing changes inevitable and necessary. Daniel, true to his adventurous nature, announced at 19 that he wanted to join the army. It was 1903 now, a new century, and the world was changing rapidly. Ethan and Helena worried about their son, but they supported his choice, knowing that holding on too tightly would only push him away. They saw him off at the stage with tears and pride mixed together, making him promise to write regularly. Rose showed her mother's love of teaching and her father's determination. She attended normal school in Phoenix, one of the first women from Globe to pursue higher education, and returned to teach at the very school where Helena had once worked. Helena attended Rose's first day with emotions she could barely contain, watching her daughter stand before the class with confidence and joy. Jacob, the youngest, developed a passion for horses that exceeded even his father's knowledge. By the time he was 16, he was training horses that sold for premium prices, his skill and patience creating animals that were sought after throughout the territory. As Ethan and Helena entered their 50s, they began to gradually hand over more of the ranch operations to Samuel and Alice, who had moved into a house Ethan built for them on the property. It was bittersweet, stepping back from work that had defined so much of their lives, but it was also freeing. They took another trip, this time to San Francisco, where they stayed for 2 weeks exploring the city and marveling at the changes the new century had brought. Automobiles shared the streets with horses, electric lights illuminated the nights, and the sheer size and energy of the city was overwhelming and exhilarating. But both of them were glad to return to Globe, to their ranch, to the mountains and the sky and the life they had built. Home would always be there, in that place where Ethan had first brought a desperate, shunned woman and offered her not just shelter but love. On their 25th anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a celebration at the ranch. The house was filled with people, friends and family and neighbors, all there to honor the couple who had built such a strong and loving partnership. Stories were told, toasts were made, and through it all, Ethan kept Helena's hand in his, their fingers intertwined as they had been for 2.5 decades. Doc Harrison, now quite elderly himself but still sharp, raised a glass. To Ethan and Helena, who proved that the best love stories are the ones built on kindness, respect, and unwavering commitment. You two have shown this town what true partnership looks like, and we are all better for having witnessed it. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock Ethan had given Helena on their first anniversary, they sat on the porch one more time. The same porch where he had first told her he loved her, where they had shared thousands of sunsets, where they had watched their children play and grow. "If you could go back," Ethan asked softly, "to that day when you were sitting under the cottonwood tree, exhausted and alone and scared, what would you tell yourself?" Helena thought about it, remembering that desperate, broken woman she had been. "I would tell her that the worst day of her life was actually leading her to the best life she could imagine. That the man on the horse approaching her was going to become her whole world, her partner, her greatest love. That being shunned by that town was going to push her toward a home she would never want to leave. I wish I had stood up for you sooner," Ethan said, a hint of old regret in his voice. "I should have defended you to the school board, should have called Thomas out on his lies immediately." "Everything happened exactly as it needed to," Helena assured him, squeezing his hand. "If you had defended me then, I would have been grateful, but I might have stayed teaching, might have moved on eventually to another town, another life. But you offered me your home, and in doing so, you offered me yourself. We built this together, Ethan. All of it, from those first awkward meals to this moment right now, we built it together, and I would not change a single thing." Ethan pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, horse and hay and leather and home. The stars were coming out, the same stars that had watched over them for all these years, witnesses to their love story. "I love you," Ethan murmured into her hair. "Every day I love you more than the day before. I did not know it was possible to love someone this much." "I love you too," Helena replied. "My cowboy who saw a woman in need and said you are welcome in my home. You saved my life, and then you gave me a life worth living." They sat together in the gathering darkness, two people who had found each other when both had needed it most, who had built a love that weathered every storm and grew stronger with every passing year. The ranch stretched out around them, the land they had worked and nurtured, the home they had filled with love and laughter and children and memories. Inside the house, photographs lined the walls, chronicling their life together. Their wedding day, Ethan serious and proud, Helena radiant with joy. Each of their children as babies, as children, as adults. Grandchildren added to the collection. New generations carrying forward the legacy of love that had started with a simple act of kindness. The night grew cooler, and eventually, they went inside, Ethan banking the fire while Helena locked the doors. They prepared for bed with the comfortable routine of long marriage, moving around each other with practiced ease in the small space of their bedroom. In bed, Ethan pulled Helena close, her back to his chest, his arm draped over her waist. This was how they slept, had slept for 25 years together even in unconsciousness. "Good night, my love," Helena whispered. "Good night," Ethan replied, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. The years continued to roll forward, bringing more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Daniel returned from the army after several years and settled in Globe, marrying and starting a family of his own. Rose continued teaching, becoming headmistress of the school eventually, respected and admired throughout the community. Jacob's horse breeding operation became one of the finest in Arizona, and he married a woman who shared his passion for horses. Samuel and Alice ran the ranch with the same dedication and love that Ethan and Helena had shown, teaching their children the values of hard work and integrity. The Zimmerman name became synonymous with quality and honesty in the region, a reputation built on decades of fair dealing and good character. Ethan and Helena grew old together, their hair turning silver, their faces lined with the marks of years spent in the Arizona sun, their hands weathered from a lifetime of work. But their love never aged, never diminished. If anything, it deepened, becoming richer and more complex with every year they shared. They celebrated their 50th anniversary, surrounded by a crowd so large it spilled out of the ranch house into the yard. 4 children, 14 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren, all there because of the love between a cowboy who had offered shelter and a teacher who had needed a home. During the celebration, several of the grandchildren asked Helena to tell the story of how she and Grandpa Ethan had met. She looked at her husband, saw him smile and nod encouragingly, and began the tale that had become family legend. She told them about arriving in Globe full of hope, about teaching the children and loving her work. She told them, in terms they could understand, about being falsely accused and losing everything. She told them about sitting under the cottonwood tree, about Ethan riding up on his horse and offering help when no one else would. "Your grandpa said to me that day, 'You are welcome in my home,'" Helena said, her voice still strong despite her years. "Those 6 words changed my entire life. They offered me not just shelter but hope, not just safety but love. Everything we have, everything you all are, comes from that moment of kindness." Ethan, sitting beside her, took her hand and raised it to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Best decision I ever made," he said simply, and the family erupted in applause and cheers. That night, after everyone had gone home, Ethan and Helena sat on their porch one last time. They were both tired, the celebration having taken more energy than it once would have, but neither wanted the day to end quite yet. 50 years, Helena mused. "When I was that scared young woman with nowhere to go, I could never have imagined this, all of this. I am glad I found you that day," Ethan said. "I am glad I listened to my heart instead of worrying about what people might think." "I am glad I trusted you," Helena replied. It was the bravest thing I had ever done, accepting help from a stranger going to his home. But somehow I knew you were different. I knew I could trust you. You could then, and you can now, and you could every day between, Ethan assured her. Until my last breath, Helena, you can trust me to love you. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, the same wild sound they had heard on their first night together. So much had changed, but so much remained the same. The evening grew late, and they helped each other inside, their movements slower now but still synchronized, still working as the partnership they had always been. They prepared for bed, and Helena looked at her reflection in the mirror, seeing the old woman she had become but also seeing echoes of the young woman she had been. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Ethan suddenly. "Taking in a woman the whole town hated, dealing with the gossip and the scandal." Ethan came up behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Not for 1 second. You are my heart, Helena. You always have been from that very first day. The town's opinion never mattered to me, only you mattered." She turned in his arms and kissed him, a kiss that held 50 years of love and trust and partnership. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. They climbed into bed, settling into their usual position, and Ethan held Helena close. Outside, the wind whispered through the cottonwood trees, and the mountains stood eternal watch over the valley. Inside, two people who had found love when both had needed it most drifted off to sleep, still together, still in love, still home. The Zimmerman ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family, each generation adding their own story to the legacy. But the original story, the one about the cowboy who offered his home to a shunned woman and found love in the process, that story lived on, told and retold, a reminder that kindness and courage and love can triumph over prejudice and lies. Ethan and Helena lived to see their 60th anniversary, a remarkable achievement that was celebrated throughout Globe. By then, they were both quite frail, their bodies finally succumbing to the years, but their minds remained sharp and their love remained strong. On a warm spring evening, much like the evening when Ethan had first told Helena he loved her, they sat on the porch together. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Helena felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. "It has been a good life," she said softly. "The best life," Ethan agreed, "because I lived it with you." Helena rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the familiar comfort of his presence. "I love you, Ethan Zimmerman. I loved you when you were a young cowboy on a horse offering shelter to a desperate woman. I loved you when you were a new father holding our firstborn son. I loved you when you walked our daughter down the aisle. I love you now, and I will love you beyond this life." "And I love you," Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion. "My Helena, my wife, my partner, my greatest blessing. Thank you for trusting me all those years ago. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for every day, every moment, every breath we shared." They sat together as the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the world in shades of purple and gold. The ranch was quiet around them, peaceful and content, a testament to everything they had built together. When Samuel came to check on them an hour later, he found them still sitting together, Ethan's arm around Helena, her head on his shoulder, both of them sleeping peacefully. They looked content, at peace, and Samuel left them there, covering them with a blanket and sitting nearby to keep watch over his parents as they had kept watch over him and his siblings for so many years. They passed away within hours of each other, neither willing to live without the other, their hearts so intertwined that even death could not separate them for long. The town of Globe mourned the loss of two of its most beloved citizens. People who had shown everyone what true love and partnership looked like. They were buried on the ranch they had loved so much, under the cottonwood trees that had sheltered Helena on the worst and best day of her life. Their grave marker was simple but perfect, reading, Ethan and Helena Zimmerman. They built a life on kindness, courage, and love, together always. The ranch continued under Samuel's care, and then his children's care, and then their children's care. Each generation learned the story of how it all began, how a cowboy had offered his home to a shunned woman and found love in the process. The story became part of the family's identity, a reminder of the values that the Zimmermans stood for: kindness to those in need, courage to stand against injustice, and the transformative power of love. In the years that followed, people would sometimes visit the grave, especially young couples starting their own journeys together. They would stand beneath the cottonwood trees and think about Ethan and Helena, about a love that had overcome scandal and prejudice, about a partnership that had built something lasting and beautiful. The house still stood, maintained and cherished by each new generation. The porch where Ethan and Helena had shared so many evenings remained, and family members still gathered there for important moments, feeling the presence of those who had built it all. The story of Ethan and Helena became part of Globe's history, a counterpoint to the earlier scandal, a reminder that truth and love eventually triumph. In the schoolhouse where Rose had taught, and where Helena had taught before her, teachers would sometimes tell the story to their students as an example of standing up for what is right, of offering kindness even when society says not to. The Zimmerman Ranch became known as a place built on love, where generations of family had been raised with strong values and deep affection. People would point to it as evidence that the best legacies are not built on wealth or status, but on character and love, and the courage to do what is right even when it is hard. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the Arizona mountains and the wind whispered through the cottonwood trees, it was almost possible to see them there, a cowboy and a teacher, sitting on the porch together, hand in hand, building their forever one day at a time. Their love story had begun with 6 simple words that changed 2 lives and created a legacy that would endure for generations. You are welcome in my home.